Let's take a look at demography. And you know, one thing to remember, and I actually really like this slide, because what it reminds us is that the people who will be running your company in 2040 are already born. They're your children. They're your 10-year, those of you who have 10-year-olds. Those of you who have 10-year-olds, they're already here. Gen Y, we know quite a lot about. I don't want to say too much about Gen Y because they're sort of over-described. But we know two things about them. We've done a lot of research at London Business School on Gen Y. First thing is they want flexibility, just as Brian has described. Second thing is, you know, the interesting thing about being a human is that sometimes you make choices where the consequences aren't clear. And actually, for baby boomers like me, we made a lot of choices where the consequences weren't clear because we were the first generation to make that choice. One of the things we did is we worked very hard and we spent very little time with our children. At least I did. Maybe I didn't. Maybe you did. But I didn't. And I think lots of people also didn't, especially people now who are running companies. Well, the interesting thing is that our children have seen the consequences of working all the time. They've seen the consequences of that. Now, that's not to say they won't, some of them still decide to do it, but they'll understand the consequences of their choices. And one of the things we're realizing, and Brian has seen it in his research at Randstad as well, is that people want more flexible working. And Gen Y will not join you if they have to work all the time. And you're all, those of you who are, you know, in areas like law and investment banking are already seeing very talented young people leaving because they just don't want to work like this. They want to take time off to spend with their children. By the way, caring isn't just about kids now, it's also about parents. You know, imagine how it'll be for China, where every child in China is looking after two aging parents. You know, that is a big deal for China, and that will certainly affect how Chinese people want to work. In the developed world, the majority of people by the year 2030 will be over 40 years old. And we have to get our heads around that, because actually, you know, we've talked about discrimination a lot in the UK over the last 10 years, but we mostly talk about gender. The biggest form of discrimination is age. And there's loads of people over the age of 60 who want to work. There's loads of people over the age of 70. And as a community, we have to address that. I think it's a very, very big issue. And as you can see, the challenge we face is if you look at India or any of the other developing markets, the majority of people are under the age of 20 by 2030. The majority of people are under the age of 20 or 30. And that imbalance, by the way, is going to have huge implications for the West. These issues are very, very large. And even if you're a UK business, even if all your employees are in the UK, this is going to global demographics are going to change the way that you work. And at the same time, we're going to see more and more of the talented people in the world in China and India. And that's not, by the way, because China and India are great at educating their children. China's good at it, India's terrible at it. And they don't have great institutions. If you look at the top 40 universities in the world, only 2 of them are outside of the West. However, there's billions of them. And when it comes to talent, it's a numbers game. If you assume talent is normally distributed, and I believe it is, then in the past, if you were born in sub-Saharan Africa, it didn't matter how clever you were. You didn't have a chance. Imagine if you're born in let's imagine you're born in Rwanda today. Every child in Rwanda today has a computer, every single one. Rwanda's been amazing at this. That means that the ones, the really clever 10%, who 10 years ago wouldn't have had a look in, now can actually access the world's training. MIT have put all of their courses on the web. That will continue. Institutions will be forced over time to put all of their educational resources on the web. That means if you want to look for some of the most talented people in the world, my advice to you is look at where computers are being given to every child. Patagonia, Rwanda, those are your next talent pools, because there's some really smart people there who were never able to become part of the global talent pool. Okay, let's keep, this by the way is the story. And it's just as simple as that. This is data for 2010, 2030, 2050. This is where your consumers are. This is where your talent is. This is where the action will be. It will be in Asia. Why? Because by 2050, there will be 5 billion people in Asia, and there will be in Europe less than 1 billion. That's the story. Now, in the past, it didn't really matter how many people were in Asia because they didn't buy anything, and they weren't part of the global talent pool. They were living in rural, places with no refrigerators, no electricity, and no access to learn. All of that is changing as we speak. Rural Chinese want refrigeration. They want to be able to watch the television. And by the way, Chinese companies are becoming incredibly clever at building products for them that cost 10% of anything we've done in the West. You saw that with the nano car. The India Tata Consulting Group, which is part of our our research group, the motor part of that built 2 years ago a car called the Nano that retails at $2,000. A car that sells for $2,000. You won't see it in Europe, by the way, because the European lawmakers will be absolutely sure that it's not allowed into this region, but it's allowed everywhere else. And you see, what you're seeing is the rise of a huge consumer group and the rise, from your perspective, of a massive talent pool in India and in China. If you take a look at the kids doing PhDs in engineering in the US right now, 65% of them are either Chinese or Indian, 65%. And when they finish, they will go back to India and China, and they will pull their resources with them, which is why, by the way, clusters like Silicon Valley are now currently developing in Shanghai, in Singapore, in Mumbai, because you're getting these phenomenal talent pools being created there.